Let's go. Let's get moving. Let's record. All right, welcome back. We are GAME3004. That's Mobile Game Dev 2 in the winter 2022 semester at George Brown, and it's week 6, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. And when we left off, we kind of were talking about the stuff that we're doing this week. So we were in Blender. We created a simple hazard. We added several materials already. We unwrapped those materials, and we did a UV unwrapping for all the topology of the model. And we added several textures. Some of them look good, some of them don't look so good. We're going to talk about that. We added an armature. We need to do this piece before we move on to the Unity part. So let's do that now. And let's talk about what to do and how to do it. So again, I'm just going to pull up Blender, and I'm going to run as administrator because it's going to start us faster. And what I want to do here is I'm using a sandbox for you guys. So this is the sandbox. And you guys are section 401. So I've got this model here, hazard.blend. And aren't you guys 401? Or you guys are 401. And what I want to do is bring up this hazard.blend model. Let's do that. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Open, and I want to go here and grab that model and open it up. And this is what we have so far, right? And I've put this model as a starter up on Blackboard, so you can always start with me. So what we want to do is we want to add animation now. That's what I want to do. And what we have right now, if you look at our structure, I'm going to move this down a little bit. We have an outer container. We have an inner hazard body mesh. That's what this is. And we have an outer or an inner armature. That's what this is here. Okay. The armature is made up of 2 bones. We have a bone here, and we have a bone here. Okay. What we want to do is in pose mode. I want to go into pose mode, and I'm going to take the bones and modify them in pose mode in order for me to add a simple animation. That's what I'm going to do. I also want to go into some detail about weight painting, just a second, just to talk about it so you guys understand what that is. Under the hazard container, there's also something called vertex groups. You can see that the vertex groups are here as well. So there is the top bone vertex group, and there's also the root bone vertex group, those 2 vertex groups. What I can do is if I select one of these 2 vertex groups, I went to layout. I went to the layout, layout tab at the top. That's how I did it. All right, so top bone and root bone. And if I go to the top bone, and if I go from object mode, I can notice that if I select the vertex group, I have another menu option of weight paint. Let's go there. And notice what I get. I get this weight paint that looks like red and blue. And what are these weights? What do they mean? Red represents 100% influence, or a weight of 1.0. Blue represents 0% influence, or a weight of 0. What we can do is we can see that for the top bone, the one that's on the top here, it has 100% influence on the top part of the model, but 0% influence on the bottom part of the model. And in the middle, we can see that there is a gradient where there is less influence, like 50% influence. What I look at this model and we see this kind of weight painting, automatic weight paints aren't always great. But what this has done is it's caused an area where we're going to have a bend in the model. And this is what's going to be right in here is where the most deformation is going to take place, in this area right here. We have to be careful because the model may not have enough geometry in this area for it to sustain the bend properly, right? If we're going to bend it here at this bone, right? When I see this and it's not a nice gradient, a lot of times it spells trouble for the way the model will deform. Okay, that's what it's going to be. So we can also switch to the other vertex group, which is the bottom bone or the root bone. And you can see again, this has 100% influence on the bottom part of the model and 0% influence on the top part of the model, right? And what this allows us to do again is to, if I was to move this bone around, then the bottom part of the model would follow it. Okay, that's how it works. We could put the gradient. We're not going to do that today. I'm just going to show you this. We're going to do more weight painting and all that kind of stuff later and talk about this, only because we don't have a lot of time. But to show you what it looks like, if I'm in weight paint mode and I'm kind of drawing the top bone and I want to increase influence for the top bone, what I could do is, again, I could do a couple things. I could start by painting it. So I can kind of paint it by hand and I can increase the influence in different places. You can see that I can do that, right? And so that I can increase the weight of what this looks like. Now I'm increasing my weight by 100% when I'm drawing. Let's undo that change. Right? That's how it was before. I could also choose a different weight. Let's say, for example, I want 50% or 0.5, right? If I did that, and I can also reduce the radius of my brush, there's other things you can do here as well. You can see I can use just a brush or I can use gradient. If I choose gradient, right, as an example, I can kind of choose the gradient to connect with. Now, but this all becomes gradient, and that's not what I want, right? So undo. I could also just brush it at 50% weight, and I can do that. So you can see I can create my gradient around the middle, right, as an example, to create that bend and have more of a 50% influence on this in general. I'm just going to tell you, though, that doing it by hand like this is not really recommended. And there's another process we're going to use for doing this in another time. Let's undo those changes. But again, we can totally draw our weight painting. And what weight painting does is it basically specifies how much influence the bone has on the vertices around that area. So for example, the top bone has 100% influence on the vertices surrounding the top bone, but 0 influence on those vertices. When I say influence, we're going to deform the model if I move that bone, but the top bone is only gonna move this part, but not this part. That's how it works. And I wanted to show you this because we're gonna get back to this later on, and we're gonna be talking about how to do animation that's more complex than this little model right here. But this is a great learning model, I think. All right, let's get back to this. We're going to get out of weight paint and go into object mode again. And we can see that this is the model. So our model is made up of many subparts. Okay, vertex groups is one of them. And we also have modifiers. We have an armature modifier that's there. We have a couple of materials that we talked about before. The material actually looks like this, where we have a bit of a material at the top, which looks like a kind of a bronzy material that's very dark and matte. That's not what my intention was. It was supposed to be shinier. And also you can see that there are a lot of little ridges at the top here. Instead of making this very smooth, it's actually made the model very rough-like. And in order for us to do that, if I want to change the shading of this, again, I can go to Object, and I can choose two options, Shade Smooth or Shade Flat. Shade Flat is what's looking at right now. Shade Smooth actually makes this a smoother looking model. Take a look at that. And I didn't do that in the first group, but it's okay. I'm doing that with you guys. Okay, so it makes it look like, the shader makes it look like there's more vertices and more, there's more geometry than there actually is. Okay, which is kind of a cool little thing to do. All right, so this is the first part. So I'm going to save that. So I just changed that first thing. And what I want to do is I want to do some animation. The only way to do the animation is I want to go and into pose mode. I'm going to click on the outside hazard itself where I can see the bones kind of through the model. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to switch from object mode. I'm in layout. I want to switch from object mode to pose mode, please. It's going to show me the bones right here. Okay, these are the bones that I want to modify. Okay, so I can choose either of the bones, and I'm going to turn on X-ray mode so I can see them. So that's X-ray mode here at the top. I can see both of the bones. And what I want to do is start recording animation just like we've done in the past. Again, this is slightly different in order than what we did before. One thing to note is we don't need this many frames of animation. I'm going to reduce this to something like 50 frames. Okay, and let's move this over and zoom in. All right, so this is pretty cool. We've got this little model, we've got this bone selected, and this is the only one I want to modify. Let's go into front view. So we're going to isolate it so that we can see it from the front view, where we see the x-axis and the z-axis, but no y, right? And what I want to do is I want to record the first keyframe. And again, the way to do this is in the pose. If you click pose, you go to animation, and then you can go insert keyframe with an I or delete keyframe with alt I. Let's add a keyframe. So I'll say I want to add a keyframe for location, rotation, and scale. When we do that, we'll see this little mark. We should see this little mark that comes down here that shows the keyframe, kind of in there. And I want to move this over. I want to move it 5 frames at a time. So I want to move my scrubber over. And my scrubber, once it's moved over, I can see that these are all green. I'm going to rotate the bone. I'm going to use R for rotate. I'm going to rotate the bone about 45 degrees, like so. And you can already see that the rotation is deforming the model in a weird way, okay? What I want to do, we don't know if this is exactly 45. I can move away from quaternion and go to axis angle and make sure it's exactly 45. My eye was pretty good. And then go back into quaternion, please. And when we're in quaternion, press I for insert. I want to insert another keyframe, and it's going to be at this 5th frame. So what we have is we can go from here to here. And what's happening is I want to make this hazard so it bonks you in the head. That's what it's going to do, right? So it kind of causes damage to the player. I want to move this now to the 10th keyframe, or the 10th frame, and then let's rotate the model about 90 degrees, like this, like right here. So it's really going to hit the player. Again, to make sure it's exactly 90, move this into axis angle and choose this as 90 degrees. All right, go back into quaternion and then add a keyframe, location, rotation, and scale every single time. So that's the first part. So the first part is this to this, okay? I want to keep going, and now I want to make it go back up, right, to this, right? And so I want to go, back up to 90 degrees. So again, I'm going to rotate up to about 45, change it to the axis angle to make sure it's exactly right. I was way off that time, right? And then move this back to quaternion and then add a keyframe. Move this to the next position, which is the up position, right? So again, rotate all the way so it's straight as much as possible, right? Change this to the axis angle, move this to 0, right? Change it back to quaternion and go to, let's record that and add a keyframe. And now we can see what it does. It goes like this. It goes bump, right? Bump, and then back up. This could be the animation right here if you only did one side. But I want this thing to work on both sides. So depending on where you pass by, it's going to bonk on the right side and the left side, okay? To be fair, if you want it to be flexible, you would record 2 animations. One that's this way and one that's the other way, and you can perform one or the other one or both. But here we're just going to do both, just for time. Moving to the next keyframe or the next frame, and I'm going to move this again, rotate this way this time. Again, I want to move this to about 45 degrees, right? And then move it back to quaternion. If you don't move it back to quaternion, if you try and get a keyframe where it's angle, it's not going to work. Just letting you know. And then again, move your scrubber to the 30th frame, rotate it down to the 90-degree part as an example. And again, let's check that angle to make sure it's like 90 degrees. We're almost there. That time, let's switch it back to quaternion, capture the keyframe, And we're good. We're about there. And we can see that for now, what we've got is something that looks like this. So we're going this way, up, and then bonk on this way. And I want to go to the 35. I want to go up to the middle again. So let's rotate to about 45 degrees. And let's change this quaternion axis angle to 45. And go back to quaternion, capture that keyframe. This is all the same sequence over and over again. And really, we don't have to do the 40th one because that takes us back to the middle unless you want to pause. Because then we're going to make this thing repeat, right? So if you want 2 of them at the middle, that means we'll pause for 5 frames before it hits right or left. It's almost like going to be up, then right, left, up, right, left, up, right, left. That's what it'll do if I actually add another one here. So I don't want to do that. And so I want to cut it off at 35 frames. So let's just make the end at 35 frames. And so now we can test it and see what it does. Not bad. Pretty straightforward, I would say. There's other tricks we can use. We could have copied keyframes. We could have done a bunch of stuff, and we can try that later on. But for now, this is the animation. Okay. All right, let's save that. Save that model. And now we have an animation. We can rename that. Right now we have a hazard action. Let's call this the attack clip. That's what I want to bring into Unity, attack clip, save. And I'm going to ask you now, are you with me? Check mark if you're with me, X if you're not. Christian says yes. How are we doing with Liam and Michael and Mandy? Okay, no problem. I'll wait for you, Liam. Let me know when you're done, Liam. All right, so now that we have our model and we've done the keyframes, thanks, Liam, then what we want to do is we want to export it. Now, challenge for us is if we look through the model, there's a lot of little piece parts. And so when I go to export, if I go to File, Export, and I want to export to FBX, here's the export to FBX. I'm going to limit it to selected objects, but notice depending on what I'm selecting here on the right-hand side, it's really critical because if I select the top, it doesn't mean it selects all the stuff inside. This is really critical, right? The other thing that we always want to look at is the scale, which is important, right? Let's get out of pose mode and go into object mode. And we need to have that the scale is 1, the rotation is 0, and the location is 0. If you don't have these, you need to issue a Control A in object mode. Control A, if I did that, right? So if I did that here and Control A, it's going to give me this option to apply my transformations. You need to do this way earlier before we get into Unity, because if we don't do it then or now, when it comes into Unity, the transformations will affect the way that this thing comes into Unity, how it's displayed. Again, there's some issues that this thing has, absolutely. One thing also before we export is we have a lot of geometry in some places and very little geometry where it's moving. So if I kind of look at it in this thing, let's zoom in here to look at that. Look how bad that is. That's really bad in terms of the way it moves, right? Because we don't have a lot of geometry where it's moving. Maybe we can improve this before we move on. So a couple of things to note. We've already got our animation. How do I modify our geometry? I'm going to click on the hazard body and go into modeling mode. And you can see that in and around that little part of the bone, and you can see that here where there's the circle, that's where it's bending right here, right? So what I want to do here is I'm going to go into front mode. I'm going to go into wireframe mode. And I want to move some of these, remove some of this, because obviously we're not going to be affecting anything up here. There's nothing affecting. So we don't need extra geometry up here. And we don't need extra geometry up here. Where I really need the extra geometry is in here, because we only have 2 bones. So let's do that first. So let's remove some geometry. So I'm going to remove this part, and I'm going to do that by going box select mode with B. And I'm going to press the delete button and I want to remove edges. And you can see that unfortunately it keeps my vertices and doesn't do things properly. Let's undo that change. The only way that the edges will be removed properly and that whole, all the verts will be removed, but we want to keep these things going, is if I switch into edge select mode, which is really important to note. So again, edge select mode shows edges. I want to use B for box select. I want to use X for delete, and I want to dissolve edges. And when I do that, notice that it's gone, but we still have these edges that flow downward. We want to do that for a bunch of them. So let's do that. So same process, select, delete, dissolve. Select, delete, dissolve. Select, you get it. Until I come closer, okay? And I added these extra things just in case we needed them. We really don't. Now, I don't want to move this one yet. This is kind of near the center. And I don't want to move maybe this one. So let's move on. Let's move on to other places down below. We have exactly no, these ones have not going to be modified at all. Let's do these ones. Shortcut key for deleting is X. Okay, and now we're left with this. We have a zone here and a zone here and some zones there. I want to move these. And what I can do is I can select all of those and move them so that the bone is in the middle of them. And I can use my tools to do that. So kind of like this. So they're kind of proportioned correctly. Again, this is around the bone, this area that is going to be modified. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to add additional geometry right here and here and here. Okay. So let's deselect all, and I want to add additional geometry by doing a loop cut and slide. So R, Control R. And when we do that, I want to enter it, and I want to select multiple loops, at least two more cuts, right? So 2 cuts like this, maybe even more. The more geometry, the smoother that part is going to look. Okay, so maybe like something like this, 3. Okay. So right around this bend, I'm going to have more geometry to help the bend happen so it doesn't look so terribly bad. All right. Let's do the same thing over here and here, right? But not maybe as many cuts. So again, up here, I'm going to add another cut, right? And again, I'm going to do enter, and I'm going to add in 2 cuts this time. And what we can do is we don't have to be proportional. We can move things down if we want. But we're going to leave it as is, okay? So this is pretty good. We're adding additional geometry here. Well, if you want to move it closer, yes, we can. We can go here like this if you really want to. But again, I don't think it's necessary. And we'll do the same thing here over here. So over on this side, we'll add another loop cut, press enter, and then add 2 cuts. And now we have enough geometry here that we're going to be able to sustain the bend a little bit better, right? We don't need this one, chances are, or we don't need this one because it's not going to bend that far. Let's delete it. So again, I'm going to go here and select this one and dissolve. And I'm going to go up here and get this one and dissolve. All right, so that's where all the geometry is. And my friends, this is where all the bending is going to happen. Let's see if it helps out and what this looks like now when we do the animation now. And let's see if it helps or hurts or does anything to it. And yeah, that looks a little better. Look at that. It looks a little bit better. It looks like there's more material, so it's not deforming as bad as it did before. See that? Still looks weird because it's a pole. It looks like a metal pole that's somehow bending in half, which doesn't make any sense for a simple hazard. But it's, again, a lot better than what it was before. Let's also take a look at the weight paints. Did somehow the weight paints get affected? Let's see what that looks like. Again, I'm going to open up the vertex groups here and go into weight paint mode and see what happened. Well, no, right? No weight paints were affected, in this case at all, right? So, but we added more geometry there and there, right? So again, What would really help is if we could spread out and do more of a gradient down here as opposed to 100% closer up. This is where the sharp bend happens, around right here. And there's no bend that happens down around here. So between here and here, we could have added more of a gradient so that it's a little bit smoother and less deformities happened. Again, we'll do this another day. But I wanted to show you what we did. Okay. The other thing that people worry about when they do this is the texture. What happened to the texture? We did it on unwrapping, and then we removed material, but somehow the texture looks still okay. Because what happens is, even though we remove them, some of those islands, the UV islands, combined around the same area. So the effect was, and this is what Blender does, it actually makes a very nice combination here when you remove or add vertices, as long as they're right next to each other and you've already unwrapped properly, which we did. Okay, now we can save. We've already we kind of improved the model a little bit. And now we're ready to export. But when I export, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take the hazard and all the stuff in the hazard. Let's do this. Kind of close this up and just select all of it like this. Make sure that you shift select everything that's inside of the hazard. So it's completely selected. I want all of this to be selected. Make sure you select everything. Right? Because what happens is I find that if you don't select all of it manually like this, you never can tell if this is going to come to Unity. Okay, just letting you know. Everything, even the vertex groups like this, take a look. I'm literally opening everything up and selecting it all. I probably don't need to, especially the modifiers, as an example, but I'm doing it because I want all of this, right? I want to ensure that all of this is coming with me. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to go to File, and I want to go to Export. I want to go to FBX. And what I want to do here is I want to click on Selected Objects. I only care about the armature and the mesh, so those two things. And then I want to click Export. Let's save the model. And we can keep Blender open for now if you want, but I think we're going to be okay. Actually, I'm pretty sure we're going to be okay. Let's just close Blender so we can save memory. So cool, that first part is done. We have a hazard.fbx we can use. Let's pull up our Unity and move on that one. So what I want to do is, like what we did last week, we kind of went into our desktop. We went into GBC, GAME3004, looked at section 401, and I want to make a brand new kind of folder. That's the same process. So again, Game 3004 in the winter 2022 semester, and it's lab 4. There we go. And I'm going to grab everything from the previous lab. So all of this, Control A. I don't want the builds, and I don't want the library. I don't want those things. I'm going to copy all that. Go back into the lab 4 folder and paste. So I have all that in there. Awesome. That's great. And now when I open up my project, again, this is all stuff we've done before. I want to open up my project and I want to go into the desktop, GBC 3004, section 401, lab 4, and press open. Then it's going to open up that whole thing again. Okay. So again, I'd ask you, are you with me? Are you good to go? Are you doing what I'm doing right now? Liam is good. Thank you, Liam. Christian is good. Pauline is okay. That's excellent. Thank you, Michael. Mandeep. And what about my buddy Herman? Probably is. Let's see how it goes. But most of you guys are good. Thank you for that feedback. All right, so this is great. So we're opening up Unity again. We've made a very simple hazard. It's not really exciting by any means. Like, wow, this thing's going to bonk you in the head. Okay, right? No problem, Herman. So what we're going to do is, once Unity opens up, we're going to add our hazard to Unity. And then what I want to focus on with you guys is building a little bit of a health bar, which is the second part of what we're doing today. Okay, so here's Unity. I'm going to go into scenes. I'm going to double click on main. It's going to bring up our main scene. There we are. And we can see here we have our objects. I want to import all the stuff that I have. So again, I'm going to go into our little sandbox for today. And I see I have all these things in my textures. Let's import the textures first. I want to grab all the textures for the bronze as well as for the metal. So I've grabbed all those textures and then drag and drop them in. So all those textures got dragged in. Yay, that's awesome. And now I want to grab that FBX and drag that model, that FBX, into Unity. Hazard. Okay. So what does the hazard come with? It comes with the hazard itself. The hazard, let's configure the model. First thing I want to do, notice it came in here. That's nice. I want to make it so that read write is on and generate bitmap UVs is pretty good. Click apply. Okay. And then what I want to do is in the materials, let's export the materials or extract the materials to the right folder. So assets, materials, and then select that folder. There we go. And then what I want to do is let's test this thing by, let's see where we can put it, where there's more room inside of our, actually this right here is probably a good place, where it's next to the coin and there's enough room. Now remember, our model is massive. It's like 11 meters. We're going to have to scale it down. So again, let's bring that model in. You can see that that is like really massive, a massive model. It's smooth shading, so it's pretty good in terms of the way it looks. Looks like a sphere. But we want to add in the materials first. So again, I'm going to go to the bronze material. It only has albedo. And let's pass in, before we change it to Autodesk Interactive, let's pass in those textures. So as many as textures I can. So again, I'm going to the bronze part. I'm passing in the metallic. Makes it really metallic looking. I'm passing in the normal map. Okay, here's a normal map for it. There we go. And let's make it so that the normal map is like 0, let's say 0.25. So some kind of normal map like that, which is pretty cool. Right? And that's not bad, right? We can fix the normal map so it looks better. There's the normal map fixed. So the normal map actually gives us a little bit more graininess to the model surface, which looks pretty good. Okay. Let's do the same thing with the, but what happens if I move from bronze material standard to bronze material specular setup? What's the difference? You can see that specular setup takes away the shine because it needs a specular map. That's what it needs. We don't have that. We had a metal map, and that's why it looks like this. Still looks like it's bumpy, but not as nice. So let's move away from standard and let's go to Autodesk Interactive. Autodesk Interactive looks just as good, but it also has roughness. Let's add that in and see what that looks like. Does it look better? Does it look worse? Actually looks a little bit the same for roughness. If I kind of zoom in, you can see what it does. It makes it so that the surface looks very bronze-like. Okay. And again, it's not bad. I got actually a better result this time around than I did the last time because I used smooth shading. Let's do the same thing for the metal part, this part here. So again, I want to go into the material, go into the metal material, and we're looking at the metal material right here. So let's kind of reposition so we can look at it nicely. And I want to go and put in the metallic inside there. So again, in textures, I want to grab the metal texture, drag and drop that in. Right, so start looking like more metal, metallic. My normal map, drag that in, metal N. Excellent, and let's fix it so it does more of a normal map. Nice, nice, nice. And if I move this from metallic standard to, if I go to Autodesk Interactive, I can pass in my roughness as well. So metal R. Awesome. Let's move the normal map down to like 0.25 again, which is pretty good. And you won't notice it up here, but you will notice it where the light strikes it. So as the light strikes it, you can see that it's quite reflective. way down here. Okay, so it looks like metal base. And it's actually picking up parts of the scene, the colors, and it's reflecting it very nicely. So actually I'm getting a way better effect this time around than I did this morning. Okay, pretty cool. All right, so that is the metal object, and the metal object is reflecting. And we'll talk about this and how to improve and reduce and all that stuff because it looks pretty reflective, and we may decide to go and adjust this a little bit. How do we do such a thing? Here's the next thing we want to do. I want to talk about the, let's go into the object itself. So in the hazard, you can see that there are several piece parts. One thing that I always want to start with is that the hazard itself is going to be inside of another part of the another Unity module, or another Unity model, if you will. So let's call this the hazard model instead. Let's rename this to hazard model. And let's put this whole hazard model inside of the hazard, another kind of empty. So we're going to put an empty parent. There's my empty parent. We're going to call this the hazard. And again, this is, to me, best practices for Unity and Blender. Okay, so there is, so kind of one that's inside the other. Why? Because now the hazard model, which is amazing, is what it's going to do is it's going to, any transformations that it's going to do, for example, in my rotation, location, the scale that we capture for animation, it'll be relative to the hazard parent, which is, that's going to be its world as opposed to the real world, okay, which is going to be good. So that is the hazard, and we can make this smaller now. So in hazard, we can go into the scale, and I think like this is 11 meters. It should be around 2 meters. That's like 5 times less. Let's make this like 20% of the size. So 20, way down here. And there's the model. So about 20% of the size. We're going to go back down here. The model looks pretty good, and it's not as crazy big as the other one is. Pretty good. Let's save that. Okay. And the idea is that this should animate. And so what we want to do with this one is we want to pull out the pieces from it. So inside of our models, remember we have this animation attack clip. And what I want to do is in the hazard itself, on the hazard model, not the hazard bones. This is the bones. That's what these are, the bones right here, right? And we don't want the bones to be the ones, right? But actually the hazard model itself, I want to drag and drop this hazard attack clip and put it on there like so. And let's see what happens when I do that. So it has a hazard model. It creates a hazard model animator controller. Let's pull that hazard model animator controller inside of my animations folder. There it is. And we'll just call this the hazard model, or the hazard animator controller. And one thing we're missing is the actual clip. I'd like to keep it separate. So again, going back to my models, I can also test the clip to see if it works here. See what it looks like here in Unity. It looks like it's going to work. That's what it's going to look like. All right, so I want to duplicate this clip. So Control D, duplicate this clip. And we can bring this clip into the animations folder. And we'll rename it so it's hazard attack clip. Almost perfect. Hazard attack clip. And I want to use the animator controller here, and I want to move out this one. And I want to point to another one. So instead of hazard / attack clip, I want to use this one. Okay, that's the one I want to use, the new one, the one I just copied over. So now it's completely decoupled. Let's rename this thing from hazard attack clip to just attack. That's the attack animation. Save. And now we should be able to test it, and it should work. Let's see. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. And let's play and see what happens. And it works. You can tell already on the here on the thing, but it only did it once and it stopped. Why? Because our clip, and you see that the other things are converging. Our clip itself, our hazard attack clip, is not in loop time. Let's turn loop time on and press play again. Try that one more time. So again, you can see that this thing is bonking away, right? And there's a bit of timing. You can probably get through the hazard without getting hit, but we can actually pass right through it because it doesn't have any kind of collider, and these guys are waiting for me, right? All right, so that is the next step. We need to add a collider, but before we do that, let's save this, file save project, and put this up on GitHub, because this one you'll have everything that I have, right? By the way, if you wanted to see this clip as we don't have an avatar here, you can always just drag and drop the hazard model in here and to give you an avatar of what it would look like, right? So you can always watch it. If it's gonna work, it's gonna work right here. And again, you can see if it's gonna work. It sees it's working here. But what about the clip? How come it's not, we can't test it here? How come it's not working? Well, it's the avatar body we want to pass in. Let's try that again. Now we can see that that's going to work. Pretty good. But if I pass in just the hazard itself, it gives me the model, but doesn't give me the architecture, which is pretty interesting. All right, so we can actually try out the clip to see what it looks like there. All right, cool. So this is good. It's ready to go. Let's, again, just exit. And once we've exited, we're going to put this up on GitHub. I'm going to use GitHub Desktop, I think, is what we did. Section 401, section 401, section 401. Hello. And we're going to say added hazard model, Blender model, right? So we're going to go there, and then we're going to push that up to GitHub. Excellent. That's good. I'm very happy about that. Let's go back into our lab and let's see what happens. Okay, questions. Are you with me? Did you have the same success that I did by bringing in the model and doing the animation? Any issues at all? Because that's the first piece. The first piece is, hey, how about, is everything working like it should? Another problem that we have some other problems here. Another problem that we have is well, how is this going to be, how do I add a collider? I didn't add colliders with this previously. Just to test things, I'm going to disable the enemies here. So let's disable the enemy, all the enemies, so that they don't come at us, and it gives us more time to work with this hazard, right? And what I want to do is I want to add a collider. I want to add a box collider for this part, and I want a sphere collider for this part. All right, but we're going to see some issues with this thing, right? So let's add the box collider first. So I want to add the box collider so I just can't walk through it, right? It's going to be something that's blocking me to some degree. All right, so again, I'm going to hit on the hazard, and I'm going to go to the inside the hazard. There's the hazard body. This is a perfect place to add in the collider. I'm going to click in I'm going to add in a box collider. And you can see that the box collider has the bounds of the entire object. I don't want that. I want the model to have this little slimmer area. So let's use our intuition here and make the box collider a little bit smaller. So we can do that by bringing it in a little bit. And it's hard to see from this angle because, we're in 3D. So a better angle might be from the top. Let's look at it from the top and see what that looks like. Right? So again, we want to kind of zoom in on the hazard model from the top, right? And the problem with that is we can't see the shape of the object, the shape of the pole at the bottom. So it's also an issue, but we're going to get closer, at least than this, right? So we can kind of do something like that looks like this and like this, maybe bring this out this way. And then we can zoom in from this side and see how close we are. We're not greatly close. And you know what? We don't want it up here. We want this lower. So something kind of like this. And if we really want to get close, let's go into the side view and from an orthographic perspective. Okay, there's an orthographic side view, right, that we can put in. And we can kind of bring this right in to the right, to the left. We leave we don't care about the bottom. We can be sticklers and put another little collider down here, but I don't think it's necessary. And let's go from the other view. Let's try and see from other views, because that's, we want the collider to be kind of the same from at least two views. There we go. That's pretty good, right? Same. And now we want to add a second collider. But if we add it here, okay, at the top, first of all, let's see what happens with this one. What happens with this collider here? So if I run this thing, and if I look at the animation, if I go back to the scene, you can see that the collider doesn't move, right? So it doesn't matter where we're looking at it. This collider just sits there. It's good if you're trying to pass through it, right? But it's really bad, right, if we're hoping that this is going to hit us. So there's a couple of things. One is, do we really need for this collider to be all the way up here? Can't we just put it down here and put another one, along the pole? Because the pole should be able to hit us too, right? So that's something that we can do. We did this differently earlier. So again, probably around halfway, like where it's going to start moving. This is the first collider, okay? And again, if you want to watch it, you can see that that will not move, right? So there it is. That's pretty good, right? And that's the first collider. We might even be able to bring it just a little touch higher than this. And I'll do that in edit mode, just a little touch higher, something like this. But the other one, this part that moves, first of all, we want to go into edit mode because we have multiple colliders here. And we got to be careful in terms of computational, how computationally expensive it is, but it's okay. Project settings, I want to go into physics and make sure that the hazard doesn't interfere with the hazard. We don't have a layer for this. We have enemies. Enemies shouldn't really interfere with, connect with enemies, kind of stuff either. But hazards shouldn't interfere, which means I need a layer for the hazard. Let's make a new layer. We'll call it the hazard layer. There we go. And we're going to say that hazard and a hazard just don't interfere. They don't, they don't interact. Okay, we don't care about that interaction, if that makes sense, right? And well, once we add a hazard, remember, once we add a layer, then stuff happens, right? One thing that happens is the player camera won't be able to see it by default. So let's make sure that the player camera can see it. So we're going to go into the culling mask and add the hazard in. Otherwise, hazard will not be able to be seen by the player. The other thing is that the minimap camera also cannot see it right now. And if we want to make it visible, we want to click onto it, okay? For now. Maybe we'll add another marker in the future or something else like that, but we need to do that. So then how do I add a collider so that the hazard itself has a appropriately shaped collider that comes to the top and this part here? And guys, I'm going to give you a few minutes. I want to see if you guys can figure some of this out. I'll be right back. I'm going to take a short pause, and when I come back, I'll show you what I will do. Okay, I want you to think about it in Unity. A bit of a challenge. So let's stop the video for a second. And I'll be right back. I'll give you like 3 minutes. All right, that was a few minutes. We just wanted to give you a chance to try it out yourself. What are your thoughts, guys? Have you been able to figure out a way of adding the collider in the right spot? What did you do, if you did anything at all? Any thoughts? I'll show you the solution, obviously, but I want to talk about this first. Using timelines, you could do that, but there's an easier way in some ways, kind of. Touch the bone. Yay, Liam, you got it. All right, so let's do it. So what I would do is I want to attach the first collider, which is a sphere collider, on the bone. And remember, the bone that we're going to have is, if I go into the hazard, there's the root bone and the top bone. So this is the top bone. And what I want to do is I want to add a collider to the top bone, which is a regular collider. So let's just do a box collider, right? And let's think about this, where that box collider is. You can see that there isn't any geometry here whatsoever. So this is not a great way of doing it. You can definitely increase the size, right? So right now the size is like 111, right? But you don't see anything here if you look at the collider, because there isn't any geometry. Okay, so there's not like, I can increase the size of this, but we can increase it to whatever, and it's not going to show up at all, right? That's how it's going to be. This is just like a ratio, if you will. And so this just moves it around. Okay, so that's not really a great way of doing it. So a better way to do it is start with the hazard body, where we had the other one, and we already have a collider, right? Like a box collider like this one. Let's copy this one. So copy component and go back to the top bone. We're going to do this part of the collider first, and then we're going to add component. Actually, sorry, go to the transform and then copy. I want to paste component, paste component as new. There we go. So this is the new component, and I have a box as compared to what I had before, right? So let's take this box and expand it up, right? That's what I want. Again, we're still looking at this from the same side, making sure that it's kind of hugging the area that I want. Let's look at it from the other side. This is obviously no good, so let's move it over here. Can't see what it's looking at, right? And go over here and move this up, so it's kind of as much hugging as possible, right? And let's see how that works. Let's see if it's okay, if it's not okay. You know, how is it looking in terms of the box itself? So this is the box right now. If we run it, and if we look at the model, which is attached to the top bone, then we should be able to see that that top bone is moving. Take a look at that. All right, so now we have an area that's going to move around. It's going to rotate around with the top bone. Cool. Let's continue to add another one. So let's, what we want to do now is we're going to go back to the hazard body, and we're going to add another component, which is going to be a sphere collider. So there's a sphere collider. We're going to make it smaller, obviously, because it's no good, right? Because we want to make it so that we can adjust the size of the sphere, right? So again, we want to kind of grab those control points that we can see. Let's try that again. Grab those control points and bring them right in. There we go. Look at that. It's like almost in a perfect spot, right? And looks pretty good. Let's try it from different sides. Looks exactly right. And what we'll do is we'll, just like before, we'll copy the component and we'll leave it there for a second, because we can turn it off just so we don't see it, so it doesn't bother us. And I can go back to the top bone, and then I want to paste component as new. Okay, now the problem with it is it doesn't paste it exactly where it's supposed to be. It's like way over here because of where this thing is positioned and so on. And that's fine. We're going to bring it in. We're going to bring it in, and we want to set up, just check some of these out. So this one is obviously up and down, right? So we can undo that. And this one is in the 0, 0 mark. So that's what's going to be there for us. Okay, so 0, 0. We're going to bring this up, so it's -5, where it is, right? So if I move it the other direction, right? So kind of that way, it's 0.06. That's pretty close. Let's go 0.05, right? 5, 2. 0.051. My number is something like 0.051. Okay, that's where the thing is. And that's pretty good. But now we know that there's probably no need to have this way up here. So I can go to my box collider and then just move that down just a touch. So it's not really touching the other one. I tried to avoid touching them as much as possible. Okay. What about the bottom one? How does that look? Like I can't see the bottom one because it's part of the hazard body. So how does that look? You know, again, what I can do is I can lock this one up. And, well, actually, I don't want to do that. Let's go back to the hazard body and see where that is. So that's just below the line. There's a line here. This is our grid. And this is where this is. And if I go back to the top bone, we can see that it's quite low. It's probably touching almost this other one. I don't want this to touch. I want to give an area here for it to bend. So I'm kind of bringing this like a little bit higher up. Chances are the player is not going to go in here and pass right through it, right? But it's going to be close enough where it can bend and still interact okay. So now let's try this out and see how this looks in general. So if I look at the scene, you can see now that it looks okay. If I look at it from the side, that's what's happening. So there it is. Bang, bang. And that's the sphere. Okay, pretty good. So that is the collider that we put on. We have 3 of them. Theoretically, we could have put the other collider down here too, just to be consistent, because that one will only move with the body, right? So example, let's go back to the hazard and get rid of the sphere. And at least this way we can see it in one place, right? And we're going to grab this and we're going to copy component and go into the bottom bone, right? So instead of the top bone, I'm going to go into the root bone now, and I want to paste as new, right? So there it is. And I want to modify it. So it's right here. And then we can kind of modify this thing. So it gives enough room so we know we can see it in one place. Something that looks like that. Now we'll remove the other one, right? Because that doesn't look right. And we'll just go in here and make it a little slimmer. And then hindsight, probably would be a good idea to start here and then kind of connect these as close as possible. They're going to overlap a little bit anyway, and they're not going to really interact because I've turned that interaction off. So let's go back to the hazard body, and now we can remove this box collider. Remove. And I want to go back to the hazard, and I want to make this into a prefab now. So let's take the hazard and just drag that into the model, the prefabs folder. There it is. And now if I run it again, we should still have a pretty good example of that. I can go to the root bone, and you can see that that's what it looks like. So pretty good in terms of bonking us in the head. Not perfect, but you can see there's a bit of the top that's not right, but it's pretty good for what we're doing. All right, so why is this good to do, right? It's really good to do, and we can see that if we could look at it from a perspective view now, this is what we've done. Oh yeah, haha, look at that. We didn't do this side. That's bad. And yeah, of course we didn't do one side, but we did the other side. Let's go back into orthographic mode, and that's not great. Sorry guys. Definitely want to make this so that it's like not like that. Because remember, whenever we make something for 3D, we look at it, we're only looking at it from one side, but not the other side. And that's not a great idea. That's funny, actually, that I forgot to do that. Cool, so now that's better. Woo! All right, and now we can see that it's pretty good. You have a couple of colliders here that are right on top of each other, and they're not going to interrupt with us. This is like a block now. It's like definitely something that is going to be moving, right? So this is going to basically be like bonking us in the head, right? So it's going to be bonking, bonking, bonking. All right, let's file save project, and we've added a collider, and so I'm going to go to that. And I know I'm doing these little micro pushes and stuff, but I find that a lot, and we also want to remove the other piece too. One more thing I want to do. I always include the solution from the other one, and I don't want to do that here, so Let's go into here, section 401, and make sure that the extra solution here is gone. Just remove the older one. Only solution for lab 4 should be there. Yeah, so let's go back into that one, and then we'll say something like I added colliders to hazard. Okay, so do that. Nice, push to origin, and good to go. Let's go back into Unity now and do the second part of the lab. So that's the first part of the lab done. It's about an hour. How are you guys doing with this? Is this making sense to you, like how this works? Now here, listen to the underlying motive that I have here. There's some underlying stuff. The reason why I have reasons why I'm doing this with you guys, right? One of the reasons is if you guys know how to do this and add a little sphere to the end of this little bobbing hazard, you can add colliders to a hand that's trying to hit you from a zombie, right? You can add the collider there on the bone. When the zombie hits you, it's going to actually hit you and move you, right? Because it's an actual collider, which is pretty cool, right? And we definitely want that to happen. We want the collider to hit you, and you're going to feel like you know you're going to be pushed back. That's what we want. We want that to happen. Okay, so that's number one. And so too should it be for your attack from any other kind of thing, zombie or another creature or whatever it's going to be. If you want to have an organic model, we did that. We did rigging, right? And when we did rigging, we added a couple of bones. And we talked about weight painting and stuff like this. We also have some really weird effects here in the bottom of our model from a light perspective. And this is because of our lighting model, right? We added a main scene lighting last time. Notice we had a main scene lighting settings over here. And right now we're using something called progressive CPU, right, as an example. And this is okay, but not so great with mobile devices. If I go to Enlighten, that's a little different than progressive CPU. And we may have to change this later on, these settings. We're definitely not using real-time illumination, right? And we're auto-generating the light maps. That's the thing that we're doing, right? So that's something that's happening with this thing here as well. In the environment, we've made our own custom skybox. That's what we've done. And we've also added some, if we wanted any real-time light maps, they would be here. And any baked light maps would appear here. Okay, so we're not using baked lighting, which is actually more computationally expensive, but that's what we're doing right now. So going back to the environment, you can see that this is how it's done. And I can add into my scene, you know, I can bake my lights if I want to do that. All right, so that is what we've done. Okay, just to let you know. And that's why this lighting area here looks really weird. And also the model is, the way the reflectiveness is, we could probably adjust the materials to make this look a little better and more realistic, but we're not going to do that. Okay, awesome. So now that this hazard is good, how do I set up the second part, which is I want to set up this, start setting up a health system, right? And I want to set a health bar up for myself first. We couldn't get the enemies done earlier today. So I'm going to stop with what we were able to do, which is a health bar for us. So let's start off with a health bar. How do I do a health bar? So in the, a couple things. We have a coin that's random that's sitting there. Let's put that coin in coins. Yay, we want to do that. We have a hazard by itself. Let's put that hazard in another prefab, create an empty parent called hazards. Maybe we're going to have more than one. What do you think? Hazards. For now, we're just going to have one, right? And that hazard is a prefab. So we can kind of make sure there's any overrides. We're going to put the prefab is going to be applied. That's nice, right? For the hazard. And now I want to add in this bar. How do I do that? I'm going to do it in the canvas. So I'm going to go back to the canvas. Let's go into 2D mode so we can see the canvas object. Right there it is. And in the canvas object, which is here, let's make sure that we can see it in the right perspectives instead of, you know, we want to go into WebGL mode so we can see what that looks like. There's WebGL mode. Go back into the scene. We can see that that is now resized, so it looks proper. And what I want to do is I want to add in a slider. That's what I'm going to start with, a slider. That's how I'm going to start with my my health bar. So I'm going to add a new slider, UI slider. There it is, move in. And there's certain parts of it that really work nice. And one of the parts of it that really works nice is this back part. The functionality of the slider is pretty cool too. The way it works is I have this value, and what I can do is I can move the value up and down, and it goes from 0 to 1. I can change this value from 0 to 100, right? 0 to 100. So it kind of counts that up. And for us, it's best if we change this to whole numbers. So it's going to move up whole numbers, integers, right from here to here. That's pretty good. What I don't need is this little handle. Let's get rid of it. So in the slider, I want to go back where it says handle slide area and delete it. Just delete that whole handle slide area thing. Okay, go back to slider. It's going to complain that you must have a graphic. I don't have one. I'm going to go away from color tint and I'm going to go into none. And I'm going to change it from interactable to not interactable. So we're not going to interact with this thing. It's not a UI element. It's going to be a health bar for us, right? But I'm using the slider for this because it does a lot of little pieces that we need, right? All right, let's change the colors. So the background is the back part of the slider. So let's change this to red. And the foreground, which is inside the fill area, we can change that to green. There's red and green. The background is a little bit too big, and we're going to move it back. So we're going to do this by default, the background is stretched to fill the slider container. We're going to temporarily change this by clicking on the rect transform and just clicking in the middle like this. Then I want to use the rect tool and pull that back to around here, which works out to be -5. Okay, that's what it works out to be. And what I want to do with this one is go back to the rect transform tool after I've changed this, right? And I want to change this so that it is not only stretching horizontally, but also vertically when I move things up and down. Okay. And the next part that I want to do is the fill area. The fill area is stretching this way only, right? The fill itself is stretching always. I want the fill area itself, this fill area, to also stretch in all ways, all directions. And now when I move the slider, proportions up, and I use the rect tool to do that, then I have the slider look more boxy, which is kind of better for me. And when I use the slider, if I turn it down, you can see that the back area is exactly aligned with the front. Except when I go to 0. And if I go to 0, the reason why this is doing this is because of my fill. If I go to the fill area and the background has an object. We can see what the background looks like. It looks like this, right? And this background source image is the same source image pretty much that's used by this UI sprite. And these both are rounded sprites. And what we could do, not now, but in the future, is create a sprite that's not rounded, that just basically has just a little bit of, kind of an edge. Very, very simple, like starts off with like 1 pixel wide, black. And if we did that slider material, instead of using this, then it would be squarish, not roundish, and you can go down to exactly that minimum size. Here, there is a problem. It only goes down to the size that you fill with it, and that's an issue. So I'm going to give you another component later on where you can change the slider and make it look even better. All right, so that's the slider part of the my health bar, and we'll just call this the bar. So we'll say bar, and we're going to pull this thing, this whole bar, so it's down towards the left part of the screen. So let's take this bar and let's move it. And we'll just move it down to there. Okay, and we'll make it a little longer. So again, we can kind of take the rect tool and make it larger. And we'll make it a little bit wider so that it looks a little nicer. And the next part that we want to do, let's move it over a little bit more, is we want to add some text over near the bar. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do it in the canvas area. I'm going to add a new right-click UI. And I'm going to call this text, which is a label. If you haven't imported Text Mesh Pro yet, you need to import the TMP Essentials, which I need to. That's a second. There we go. Done. And now this text TMP object, I want to change this thing so it reads health bar label. That's what it is. Here's my health bar label. And where is it? Well, it's way over here. Let's pull it down so it's closer to this. And it should read health, something like that. And it's too big. Let's make it auto-sized, right? And let's change the health bar with the rect tool so that it is kind of lower, the same size as this. It's hard to see because I'm in this area here. But I want to make it kind of like this. And I want to make it so that it kind of starts near the edge of this bar, right? I want to, for the health bar itself, so I made it auto-sized. Like I said, I want to make sure that it's centered inside of the area, the container, and probably right aligned if possible, right? If aligned at all. If you want to make it center aligned, that's cool, but then you got to use the rect tool to kind of pull it in a little bit more. Cool. And how does it look in the game? It looks like this, right? Pretty good so far, right? What I want to do is duplicate this health bar label. So Control D to duplicate the label and then pull it across. And it's going to be somewhere in here. This time I'm going to use the rect tool to kind of make it so that it fills up just the slider piece. So just here from the slider, this little thing that I had here, the bar, and on the other side. And then let's change this so that this is the health bar value. Health bar value. And let's change the health bar value so that it reads 100. And that's the health bar value that it's going to read. So that's the first part. I'm going to encapsulate all this, the bar, the health bar label, and the value in another empty parent. And we're going to call this the health bar. And there's the first part of your UI. This is the UI. Guys, I'll be right back. Sorry, I'm just getting interrupted. I'll be right back. And then we'll continue with the next part. I need 3 minutes. And back. There we go. Sorry, guys. When we have kids and they're home from school and everything else, and they've been here all day, they're going to start crazy because of the weather, right? Okay, great. So again, what we want to do is we want to continue with the health bar, right? So, and let's continue with the stuff that we're doing. All right, so that's great. So we have our health bar UI, and let's put this up on GitHub. So again, file, save, right? And file, save project. And then let's go to close off Unity like this, and then put this up on GitHub. So we'll say added health bar UI, commit to main as an example. And once we commit to main, we'll push it. There we go. All right, there we go. Awesome. And let's get back into that here, where we're going to start off with lab 4 again. Again, nice and easy, nice and slow, nothing too crazy. And we want to do this because once we have our health bar UI right in the canvas, we can replicate this for something we're going to use for our enemies in the future, as well as other things like hazards. If I want to destroy a hazard, or if I want to destroy something like a destructible piece of the environment, I can do that too. And I can use health bars to do this as well. Sometimes health bars are, well, they're always non-diegetic. And the problem with that is it doesn't make sense that you would have a health bar in some places. And so sometimes we want to show the health bar only when necessary. And the rest of the time we can hide it. All right, so this is the health bar, but we need some functionality now. And again, let's add a little script. And we need some way of getting this health bar working. So in the canvas, you can see the health bar itself. Inside of the slider, which is the bar, there is an area that is the event area. And I want to add in an event slot. So this is the on value changed event. And this is where I'm going to put the health bar event. For now, what I'm going to do is, before making a complete, a health system, let's just use a simple game controller, make a new empty game controller. And so we can explore and we can do a little bit of prototyping, okay, for this thing. So here's game controller. I want to tag this as the game controller. I want to also reset it so it's in the middle of the screen. And what I want to do for the health bar is I want to add a new script called UI controller. So let's do that. We've done this before, but let's just do it for now. This could be the health bar controller. But I want to make a UI controller because then I have freedom. We're going to use the UI controller for other things later on. So that's why I'm doing it now. We can make an additional script later if I want to add control for the health bar. All right, let's attach the UI controller to my game controller. There we go. Awesome. And then I can double click on the UI controller and open it up. Okay. And you can see here that I've got start and update. For now, I'm just going to remove them. And we're going to have a couple of scripts, one of them, or a couple of functions. One of them is going to be a public void on health bar. Oh, come on. ReSharper is taking its toll. On health bar. Come on. Whew. Right. On health bar changed. Health bar value changed. Right. That's the event name. And what I want is, when the health bar value is changed, I want to change in Unity, I want to change the health value label. So that's inside of the health bar, right? So that's in here. The health bar value, I want to change that to reflect the value of my health bar itself. Remember, the bar has a value property. And when I change this as an example, then I want the text to change, to reflect this as well. All right, so let's go back to our code, and I need some references. I want a reference to Text Mesh Pro, because that is a Text Mesh Pro label. So I'm going to say using TN Pro. I also need a using statement for my slider, which is my health bar, Unity Engine.ui. I need that. And let's go in here and do it. So we'll say we want a public reference to the health bar itself, right? Health bar, which is the slider, sorry. So we'll call this health bar. Okay, and we also need a public reference to a TMP text object, which is the health bar value. And it's really the health bar value label, if you want to call it whatever you want to call it here. And what's going to happen is when the value gets changed, I'm going to say that the health bar value label dot text is going to equal to the health bar dot value, because all sliders have values. But this is a float, and we want to change it to a string, so we're just going to do that toString method. Okay. And let's go back to Unity. And now that we've written that text, that the script is very simple. I want to grab my game controller and drag it into this onValueChanged event. And I'm going to select the UI controller on health bar, our health bar value change. There we go. Woo. All right, but if I run it now, okay, just to give you a sense of this, well, if I change it here, it automatically works. Take a look at that. So I modified here, and I can see that the health bar changing, but unfortunately, I'm not seeing the value changed when I do that. So if I change this to another value, like let's say 20, it changed to exactly where it's supposed to go, but the text doesn't change. That means that I need some external, process to change that value. So again, going back to our code, we're just prototyping. I want another way of kind of affecting the health bar. Let's say something like take damage. So I'll say public void. We'll call this method take damage. And we'll pass in a integer of damage, whatever that integer is. And we're going to say that when I take damage, that whatever the damage is going to be subtracted from my health bar value. So I'm going to say health bar dot value minus equal to damage. And that's going to show the damage in the health bar. And when it shows, then the text is going to change to reflect that change. Ooh. And to test this, let's make a temporary start method. So again, it's going to be a void start. And inside there, we'll say take damage, maybe 20 damage, see what happens to that. And does it drop to 20? We want to go from 100 to 20. And again, one thing I want to do, because I'm going to use this outside of here eventually, is I want to do a system.serializable. Okay, we're going to use that in a second. And when I come back out here, you're going to see that in Unity, we have 100%, right? We have 100%. What did I do? Yeah, we need square brackets. Somehow that got deleted. It's okay. So that means that when this starts, it starts off at 100%. But what I'm going to do is, as soon as it starts, we've indicated for the start method to give me 20 damage. Let's see what that does, if it actually works. So let's press play, and it should just drop down to 20. We should see it visibly, as well as, oh yeah. Well, the game controller needs a couple of references. One of them is the bar, or the health bar, and the other one is the health bar value. Can't forget those. Let's try that again. And yeah, there it is. Look, drop down to 20. So it shows 80 and it shows a bit of red where it dropped down. So exactly how we want it to operate. Awesome. All right, how do we test this in real time though? This doesn't make sense to do it now. That's a great little prototype, but we want to take this damage away, and we maybe want to even remove the start method. And let's make it so that when the hazard bonks us on the head, we take damage. Okay, that's how we want to do it. And that's where we'll stop for the day. We got to talk about some issues here when it comes to this too, because there's some problems with the character controller array around this. We have to make some assumptions. Okay, back to our player, right? So back to the player, and let's go from 2D to 3D for a second. So the player is going to wander over here, right? It's going to go next to this this hazard. The hazard is going to bonk him on the head, and is going to take damage. That's what we want it to do. Okay, issues. First of all, does the player even get bonked? Let's see what happens. Do I feel the effects of the collider? We never really tested that, so let's see what happens. So I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to try and pass by, and do I get bonked? Oh yeah, look how I get moved, right? So I actually do get bonked, right? Bonk, bonk, right? That's pretty good, right? So it looks pretty good. It's reasonable and all that kind of stuff. That's good. So this definitely hits us. This the hazard hits the player, 100%. All right. So the reasonable thing to do is when the player gets hit by the hazard, as an example, then we take damage, right? So let's add in the player controller, player behavior, right? We want to use an event. Now remember that to use an event with the character controller, it's like I want to do controller on controller hit. It's a totally different event, right? On controller collider hit, something like that, right? And we can look that up if you look it up on online. So on controller collider hit. And what this is it's used in the character controller, right? So the character controller is something that is going to function, right? It tells us what it is. It's called when the controller hits the collider when performing a move. And this can be used to push objects when they collide with the character, okay? So character controller has this on controller collider hit, right, method that will allow us to do this kind of thing, right? So interesting. And if I look up, we're looking at the wrong version. Let's go 2021.2. If I look at character controller, because that's what we're using. Character controller has collision flags. Character controller has a lot of stuff. And character controller on controller collider hit is what we want to use, this thing, right? So this is the one we want to use, character controller on collider hit, right? And so how would this work? It's really the on controller collider hit event that we want, this thing right here. Let's see if we can actually detect a collider hit, all right? And see how this works. Now there's issues, okay? One thing to note, it says rigid body hit.collider.attach rigid body. And then if body is equal to null, then body is kinematic, blah, 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 and so on. They have a little bit of a script here to push you around, okay? So nice. But I want to detect the hit first. So we'll grab this script right here. And this is kind of a bit of importance. There we go. And let's do this. There we go. And let's see if we actually get a hit at all. Notice that this is a hit. So this is a controller collider hit event, right? And if this triggers the hit itself, so it is of type, hit has some information on it. So hit dot, you can see that the hit dot game object, right? The game object that was hit by the collider, by the controller, right? So that's interesting. It says hit point, hit rigid body. So we can say that hit.gameObject.name. We can try that out, and let's print that out. So we'll say debug.log. we want to take advantage of the controller. And let's see what this does. So, ta-da, going back to Unity, and does it work? And we'll talk about how to do it without the character controller as another method. Okay, so ta-da, walk around, and when we get hit, where is tile 1? And we're getting hit by tile 1. Top bone is hitting us. Look at that. So top bone hits us a bunch of stuff. Root bone, right? So we can get hit by stuff, and we can look at those things, and it kind of works. We're getting responses. But we're also getting responses back from other stuff, which is pretty cool, right? Because we're getting a sense of what's hitting us. Okay, so that's pretty good. So it got GameObject.compare tag might be the right thing to do. Compare tag, right? And we want to compare tag with hazard. That's the one we want to hit. We don't have a hazard tag yet. So we can say that if, just like we've done before, if hazard hit the GameObject.compare tag is hazard, then we want to take damage. And we want to use a reference to our game controller to do that right now because we don't have anything else. Let's add a public reference to our game controller. So game controller, actually it's actually called UI controller. Thank you very much. UI controller, we'll call this the UI controller for now. Again, this will be the health controller later on. We're going to say that when we do that, the UI controller dot take damage will take damage like in 5-point increments, something like that. Okay, let's see if this works. But first we got to set up the hazard compare tag. All right, so we're going to go back over here to Unity, and I'm going to go to the hazard and go to the hazard itself. It doesn't have a tag. Let's add a tag, and we'll make a new tag called hazard. There we go. And if we assign it to the hazard here, yes, that's nice, but we need it everywhere. We need it where it's going to hit us, which is in the root bone. Remember, the root bone is the thing that's hitting us. That's where the thing is, the root bone and the top bone. So we need definitely those places. We need it to be marked as a hazard, okay? Because those are the places where we have the collider. The hazard body doesn't have one, so we don't care about that. And the only place we really need to do it is here, here, and maybe at the top level, right? Right here. All right, let's take that hazard prefab and apply it all. So all hazards will have that, and let's see if this works now. And this is the first iteration of our health bar taking damage. Let's go. So again, and if we go through it, and oh man, it worked, but the player didn't have reference to the UI controller. We need to pull that from the game controller in there. There we go. Save and try it again. But it kind of worked because it gave us an error. Errors are good because it indicates to us that we've forgot something or we need to do something else. So if it passed through and it hits us, then we should be able to take damage, right? It's moving us, but how come that I'm not taking damage all the time? Right? Because it's trying to hit us, but what's going on? I mean, we were actually like being able to detect that was happening. So hit game object compare tag hazard. What happened? I mean, it was working before and now not working. There's the hazard, right? And we have our root bone is a hazard and top bone is a hazard. Both of those have colliders on them, which is what we want. So the collider is working with us, it's hitting us, but it seems that it's not liking it much. There's also the top bone end. We didn't tag that as a hazard. So what happened? Why do you think this is not working the way it is? Again, we can tag everything as a hazard. It doesn't really matter, right? We're using compare tag, and compare tag is always flaky. But we'll talk about why it's not working here. And we'll, again, apply. There's the hazard layer. We have the hazard layer. But I want to apply the hazard to all of them. Okay, so all of those are applied as hazard. But why isn't it working? What do you think that is? This compare tag is interesting. So again, we're getting hit, we're getting moved, right? But you know, we did actually take damage. Let's just do that again. That actually worked. Okay, so let's do that again. And let's take a look at my damage. So we are at 100, and we go over here and boom, we went from 100 to 0 immediately. Okay. So this is the problem with this hit collider thing. The hit collider is not like on collider on collision entry or on collision exit. It's not like that. It is a hit which is very much closer to like a raycast more than anything else. So as long as I'm getting hit by this collider, it's going to physically move me. But the way we're doing it right here with the hit, so hit game mods, remember what hit can do for us. It can detect hits, but it took thousands of hits, not just one, right? So hit itself dot, you can see what it does. It has the hit collider. So that's something that we can look at, hit collider. And that collider is, with the collider that was hit by the controller and how many times it's getting hit. So that's kind of a different way of doing things than what we've been used to, right? And you can see that there is contact offset and a bunch of stuff, but it really doesn't do on collision enter, on collision exit. On collision enter and on collision exit is you've got something that is colliding and all that kind of stuff. So this works, but it doesn't. Okay, just FYI. So this is okay, but doesn't work. So what else can we do? What else can we do? We want to be able to collide with the object, and I want to keep using the character controller for now. So that's not an option to turn it off, because some people might say, turn off the character controller, it sucks. You're right. It's hard to work with at times, but we got to think about how this is going to work, right? So this is going to hit me, and I want to get hit by this thing, and I want to trigger a collision, okay? I want to trigger a collision. And in order for me to trigger a collision, I need another type of collider outside of the one that I'm using. So on the player object, let's go back to the player, we have a capsule collider. And what I want to do is let's add another one. Let's add another collider called a capsule collider. And the capsule collider right now is literally skinned on top of the other one, and it's too close. We need to make it a little bit bigger. So we're going to change the size of the capsule collider right here. So we're going to make it so that it is fatter than the regular one. We're going to make it a trigger. And remember, the way that this works is it needs to have a rigid body that's kinematic at the minimum. And unfortunately, the character controller, although it uses a rigid body, is not the same rigid body that we need. Let's add a component which is a rigid body, and let's make it kinematic, because we need a rigid body in order for the trigger collider to work. Okay, that's something that also has to happen. So again, I'm going to make it kinematic so that it doesn't collide with anything else we have. And now we can start thinking about getting trigger collisions with something else. Remember that trigger collider needs another trigger collider on the other side to make this work. Okay, so this can also be tricky. So let's go back into the game controller. Right. So again, there's a couple ways to do this. Right. One way is to use a regular collider, but then we're also going to be colliding with the environment. We don't want that. Right. And we already have a collider with the environment, which is this one, right? And if we're going to go there, then we're almost at the point now where we can consider not using the character controller at all. Okay, so that's something we're going to start thinking about soon anyway. So here's the rigid body. It's kinematic, which means it doesn't. It's not going to take hold. We're not going to use gravity on it. That would be a bad mistake. So no gravity on this rigid body. It's literally to help us with on trigger enter, right? So again, we're going to say, make it public, void, on trigger enter. And we're going to make it so it's a collider, right? Other. And let's see if we can just connect anything. So we'll say debug.log. And then on the debug.log, we'll say collision, right? Let's just say any collision. Let's see if we can detect anything. So collision, okay? Remember, what's the trigger, right? So then now what? So again, things can be not exactly ideal if we don't do things properly, right? So let's just do it the right way and see what happens. So moving through, we have a collision because these are triggers. right? Those are triggers too. And what about this one? Is there a collision with this one? Yeah, there is. Look at. Oh yeah, right. We're getting hit over and over again, and it's a trigger collider that's interacting with another one. And every time it hits us, it only hits us once, not 10 times. That's the way we want it. Cool. Excellent. All right. And now we can filter again. So instead of it being any collision, well, we want to say that if other.gameObject.compareTag is equal to the hazard, right? Then we can say that UI controller.takeDamage 5. So that's kind of a reasonable amount. Save, go back, and try it out. And let's see if this is any better now than we did before. Once, when we're using the trigger, the on, the other event as an example, it hit us and we just did all damage. Here, we get hit once, we get a few damage taken off at the same time, and it's reasonable. We also feel the thing, we get knocked back. So it's kind of a good feeling when we get hit. We can add sounds to add to the feedback for the user until we get to 0. So it's pretty good, and we get hit. And that's our first prototype health bar. Okay. Questions around this and what I did. Again, some things that are not great. Okay, and I got to mention them because it's true. They're not great. Things that are not great. Okay, that we talked about before. Let's just turn off that marker layer for a second. Things that are not great. Things that are not great are we have our game controller and it has a UI controller. We should probably make this health bar controller together, kind of combined together with the health bar. So in the canvas somewhere, it would be nice if the health bar controller was self-contained. Example would be if the canvas had a health bar controller item. I want to talk about this a little bit as well for a couple of reasons. So what would I do is if I was going to make this work for enemies and other things, I'd want to make the health bar controller appear in world space, right? Which means I need a copy of this canvas, narrow down, making it really, really small, that's floating above the enemy's head, right? Or whatever else I want to destroy. And that health bar that's sitting on top of the enemy's head should be billboarded to my eyes, to the character, right? Which is the thing that we need to do next, right? So that's something that needs to improve. The canvas should have the canvas itself should have access to the script, all right? So that's what we should do. So it should be kind of self-contained. Okay, that's the thing that's happening. So once I attach the health bar, it has a health bar script immediately, all right? That's one way of doing it. The other way to do it is make the health bar controller separate and attach it to everything that needs a health bar. So for example, I could attach it to the player, I can attach it to the enemy, and so on. Yeah, the only way that would happen is if your mini-map camera had an audio listener, right? At the same time that your main camera, which is your player camera, if that has an audio listener as well. So if both of those have audio listeners, you'll get that warning. Okay. And that's it for today. So file save, file save project, and now we're good to go. It works, and I think we're okay. Any questions or comments about the health bar? What are your thoughts? No problem, Liam. Again, straightforward. I think it's a good prototype to start off with. I think we can build on this kind of concept. We're using a slider, which is kind of a built-in UI element. It has some built-in functionality to save us some time. And we know it works. We just tested it. Now it's a matter of modifying our code and to make it better. Okay, that's what we're going to do in future videos. Okay, that's it for me today, guys. Again, one thing to note is before you go, and I'm going to put this up on GitHub first. Let's do that. So file, save project, close this off, and put this up on GitHub. So say we added or completed, let's say, health bar prototype. Needs lots of work still, but we're getting closer. All right, and we figured out some more things about the character controller we don't like. But one thing I wanted to mention was that For the course itself, remember you have a lab report that's I've posted, and just wanted to go over it with you again one more time. For the lab report, guys, you need to show me that you've completed it. So whatever parts need completing, highlight them, please. So go here and click the highlight button, right? So we have a Blender, create a hazard, the armature and animation for Blender, Blender hazard import into Unity, and Unity health bar is the only things that I want you guys to do with of course, version control that is required. Again, worth 25 marks for your 2%. Okay. Any question around this? This is the lab report. It's been posted up on your lab next week. Again, remember that next week on Monday, a couple of administrative items. Next week on Monday, we have Family Day. That's what's happening on week 7. And the other thing that I also want to mention is that next week, we're also going to have no lecture. So there's no more lab next week for this last part of semester. We will have a project checkpoint that I will release either tonight or tomorrow. And you'll be able to sign up for your groups for either Tuesday or Thursday presentation. That's something that's coming up. Okay, so make sure that you understand that that's coming up very shortly. Okay. Are any questions before we go for the day? Okay, guys, thank you so much then. If there's no questions, I'll see you guys next week on Tuesday. I'm looking forward to seeing your prototype presentations and the checkpoint that you're going to come up with for me for next week. Thanks so much.